Hello, everyone. I'm Atlanta author Matthew W. Quinn, and you can find me in my Substack, The World According to Quinn, and this is my story, Nicor, first published in Heroic Fantasy Quarterly in April of 2013. So, here we go. Nicor by Matthew Quinn. Crows cawed in the distance. The Danes sitting in the longship began muttering ominously. Geary Jorgensen, a dark-haired, beardless boy of 13 summers, leaned forward to listen. "Is that the other ship over there?" he asked his friend Halvor Skallagrimson, a big red-bearded man who sat across the aisle. Halvor nodded. "Aye," the older man said, his ordinarily jovial face hard as rock. "Something's wrong." He pointed. Gary's gaze followed his gesture to the riverbank where the other longship lay beached. Blood soaked the second ship's sails. A mutilated hand peeked out between two of the shields lining its length. A cloud of crows rose from the beached vessel as the longship drew near. He swallowed. Einar Svensson, the towering Danish commander, rose from his oar. "Take us to the side," he ordered, teeth gritted, hand on his sword. The steersman obeyed. Gary rose from the rowing bench as they pulled alongside the other longship. Upon seeing what lay inside, he sank back down, his morning meal fighting its way back into his mouth. Mutilated corpses lay scattered throughout the ship and on the ground nearby. All of them bore long, slashing wounds, and their empty eye sockets indicated the crows had been at them for some time. While Gary struggled with his roiling stomach, scarred and swarthy Ejnar Olafsson vaulted into the second ship. Einar followed. Gary forced himself to peek over the side and watched the two inspect the dead. Einar tore through the bodies as if he was looking for someone. "This is strange," Ejnar said. "Nobody stripped them." Einar continued rooted through the pile of dead, apparently oblivious to his subordinate. Then, suddenly, he cried out and sank to his knees. "Sir," Ejnar asked, "what's wrong?" Einar turned to Ejnar. Gary could see his lord's face twisted with pain. When he spoke, his voice sounded empty and flat. "Do you remember who we were supposed to meet?" "Falki Sorensen, sir." Gary's eyes bulged. "Einar's foster brother." Einar nodded and pulled something from underneath the corpse. It was a cracked sword with an image of a dragon worked into the blade. A severed hand, heavy with rings, hung from it. "Whose do you think this is?" Einar asked gravely. Gary's heart leaped into his throat. "Oh, gods, that's Falki's." "Sorry, sir," Ejnar said quietly. The big man thought for a moment. "He might not be dead." Einar snorted. "He wouldn't show any man his back." He shook his head. "We can mourn later. Right now we need to figure out what happened." Einar rose to his feet and surveyed the ruined ship. "Do you see any unbroken weapons?" "No, sir. Whoever attacked these men must have taken the best for themselves." Ejnar thought for a moment. "Perhaps he didn't get everything." He whistled, and two more huge warriors jumped into the ravaged longship. Gary watched the foursome rummage through heaps of slain, not reacting at all to the stench of excrement from open bellies and the rotting flesh. They found only two unbroken weapons, both buried under several dead men. One was an ordinary spear, the other a fine two-handed axe with writhing serpents cut into the blade. "You were the first one over the side," Einar said to Ejnar. "The axe is yours." Ejnar grinned and took the weapon from his lord. "Thank you, sir." Einar picked up the spear and tossed it in the ship. "Whoever gets it first can have it." The other men threw themselves after the weapon. The rush of the spear quickly turned into a brawl. Gary hung back. He didn't need an extra spear that badly. "And when you're done," Einar called out, "come down here and help gather wood and brush. We'll give these men a good send-off to Odin and then bed down for the night. We can search whoever did this in the morning." "Kill the whoreson!" The shout tore Gary out of his dream of gold rings and a naked English woman and cast him into muddy, bloody reality. He scrambled to his feet, fumbling with his spear. "You're too damn slow. Enemies should be all over you." Ignoring the pain from his rowing blistered hands, he got a good grip on his weapon. Something roared behind him. "Loki's balls! What's that?" Gary spun, spear out. The tip of his weapon nearly caught Care throat cutter as he rushed past. The skinny, hatchet-faced Dane turned and fixed Gary the one-eyed glare. "Careful, boy," he growled. Gary began to stutter an apology. The older man cut him off. "Something's attacking the camp. Follow me." The pair approached the edge of the clearing where they camped beneath the half moon. Ahead of them, through cottony fingers of fog creeping in from the surrounding reeds, Halvor, another man, struggled an attacker Gary could not quite see. "You go left," Care ordered. "I'll hit him from the right." "Just one attacker?" Gary wondered. "Is it a berserker?" Gary gripped his spear tightly. Fierce sweat soaked his hair. If the intruder is one of the savage men who wore the bearskin, he might not be coming out of this battle alive. Despite his fear, Gary obeyed, drawing near the pyre where they'd burned Falki's men. Care circled to the right and then charged, sword ready to drink blood. Gary hesitated a moment, drew in a breath, and joined the attack. He managed only 3 paces and something big slammed into him, sending him tumbling. He crashed in the mud and found himself pinned beneath Halvor. "Halvor?" Gary asked, poking his friend's shoulder. "Halvor, get off me." The fallen Dane did not respond. Grunting with effort, Gary pushed himself into the sitting position. Halvor's body slid downward, leaving a trail of something wet and hot on Gary's leather jerkin. "Halvor?" Gary began. Then he saw what the intruder had done. Dark wounds marred Halvor's face. The moonlight reflected off bone peeking through the gore. The cuts in Halvor's neck looked less severe than those of his face, but the red-bearded man spattered blood when he breathed. Oh, gods. He looked down and saw glistening organs peeking out of a massive gut wound. Gary scrambled up. He had to get old Sven or Anar. They'd know what to do. Halvor's head rolled back. The skin split open around the neck wounds even further. Blood spilled into his furs. "No," Gary gasped. He knelt by his dying friend and shook him. His hands came away sticky with slime. Gary gagged. "What in all the hells is this? None of the sagas ever mentioned slime on a dead warrior." Something hissed from the reeds. Gary looked up and saw a figure silhouetted against the fog. He got the impression of a man, but never seen a man hunched over like that. He'd also never seen a man with slime dripping from his body. The figure stepped forward, but shouting erupted behind Gary, stopped it in his tracks. The young Dane glanced behind him. Men were running his way, torches and weapons in their hands. With a hiss, the intruder vanished back into the fog. The following morning, the camp buzzed with activity. Several warriors guarded the edge of the clearing, weapons in hand, while others tramped through the swamps looking for the tracker's trail. Gary just sat near Halvor's body, stunned. Weeping is for women, Gary thought, blinking back tears. Crying will dishonor him. He stared out into the stagnant river. Anar's shout grabbed his attention. "Hearken to me!" Once the men quieted, Anar whistled. Sven, a white-bearded warrior older than Anar himself, stepped forward. He looked at Halvor's corpse and the slime spattered on it and spat in the blood-drunk earth. "A Nicor attacked last night," the older man declared solemnly. "Probably attacked the other ship, too." "A water monster?" Before he left his impoverished village to serve Anar, Gary remembered his father and the old men talking around the hearth fire about flesh-hungry creatures in the bogs. But the stories, like the words of men who drank mead to escape the hard farming life for a while, had an unreal quality to them. The figure in the fog was very real. Gary watched as Anar gathered his oldest, most experienced warriors to his side. One of them was Care, whose ugly visage had been further marred by bruises and cuts. They spoke quietly among themselves. Eventually the conversation ended and Anar stepped out among his warriors. "We sleep on the ship tonight," he ordered his men. The Danes muttered among themselves. Several of the men grumbled at how this was running away. Some spoke of leaving on their own to hunt the mysterious attacker through the swamp. Anar raised a hand, silencing them all. "We're not running away. I have a plan." Wunk, wunk, wunk. Something climbed the side of the longship. Gary clutched his spear tightly and feigned sleep. Through squinting eyes, he could see a shadowy form clambering over the shields. Moonlight glinted in its great froggy eyes. Panic-stricken thoughts raced through his head. The creature in the fog had come calling. Thunk, thunk. One scaled foot ground onto the deck, followed by another. The intruder drew near. Fear squeezed Gary's stomach. Not me, not me, not me. It stepped over him and approached Eagle Fastison, another youth of 13 summers. It bent down, a lethal array of claws emerging from its long fingers. "Kill it!" Anar roared. The supposedly sleeping Dane surged upwards all around the creature. The intruder recoiled. It was then that Gary got a better look at it. It had the shape of a man, but men didn't have green scales instead of skin and mouths ringing with fangs. It hissed and snapped as they crowded it toward the stern. Edgenar struck first, slamming his new axe to the monster's cheek. The blow sent it staggering, but when its head snapped back, Gary's jaw dropped. Edgenar's blow, which would halve the head of any Dane, had barely scratched the creature. Murder lit its bulging eyes as it retaliated. The creature's lashing claws did unto the Dane what he would have done to it. Edgenar's hulking body slammed to the deck, minus most of its head. The creature wasn't finished. Its eyes locked on Anar. It surged forward, swatting a man over the side. Care stepped between the Nicor and his lord. The creature tilted its head and hissed. Care's grip tightened around his sword. "Remember me, you son of a whore?" Care growled, drawn back in a nasty snarl. "We finish it tonight." "Yes, we will," Gary agreed as he crept up behind the monster. His spear, a gift from Anar, had never tasted blood before. Perhaps a creature was more vulnerable from behind. Gary lunged. Care lunged. The Nicor was faster. It spun, backhanding Gary. He crashed into several others, sending them sprawling. With its other hand, it caught Kerr's sword and twisted it away. Kerr lived just long enough for a look of surprise to cross his face. Then the Nicor rammed its lethal claws through his leather and fur straight into his chest. The creature tore Kerr's ribcage asunder and hurled his mangled corpse into the river. Gary saw the moonlight reflected in the creature's eyes. An idea hit him. "The eyes!" he screamed over the din. "Go for the eyes!" The Danes surged forward, jabbing at its face. They couldn't get close enough. 2 men who tried went down, rendered headless and gutless by whirling claws. Then their luck changed. The Nicor slashed and missed, burying its claws in the wood behind the row of shields. The creature shrieked and tore at the wood, but could not get loose. Eski Carson, a stout Dane with a missing nose, seized the opportunity and drove a spear into the monster's face. Though the spearhead caught on the socket, its tip neatly split the creature's right eye in two. Blood and fluid spattered Gary's face. The Nicor shrieked. Its claws took a bloody revenge, ripping 5 long wounds in Eski's chest. However, a blow meant for Anar missed. Anar took advantage. He rammed his sword straight into the creature's remaining eye. The Nicor tried to dodge, but the glancing blow received was enough. The eye burst. The monster howled and blindly lunged. The warlord ducked under its attack and sent it tumbling. The men swarmed about the fallen creature, hammering it with spears, axes, and swords. Although they inflicted many small wounds, no one attacked it significant damage. Though the Nicor tried to rise, the Danes kept knocking it down. They could not keep up the blizzard of ineffective attacks forever. The monster managed to squirm between 2 men and scramble to its feet. It lashed out blindly. Its claws caught the ear of short Arnlog Thorson, who barely had any time to swing at the beast before it stepped away, carrying his ear with it. Inspiration glittered in Anar's eyes. "Force it over the side," he roared. Gary stood beside 2 other Danes and rammed a spear into the creature's gut. The weapons barely penetrated. The force of their blows lifted over the shields. The creature toppled howling into the water and managed to grab hold of a shield. Eski, still wincing in pain, snatched up the great axe from Anar's corpse. He cried out to Odin and brought the weapon down to the creature's hand. With a scream, the monster tumbled into the river. A scaly, severed finger clunked on the deck at Eski's feet. "It's running away," Eski shouted. Gary rushed to the side to see the creature swimming down the river, trailing ribbons of blood. Anar's eyes narrowed in fury. "After it!" he roared. The Danes rushed the oars. Gary strained alongside the others. The ship ground off the riverbank. Soon the longship bore down on the monster. It cocked its head in the direction of the longship and snarled, then bolted into the bog. "Beach the ship," Anar shouted. "We'll take the bastard on foot." The men ran the ship aground and spilled over the side, literally baying for blood. Gary forced himself among those the first off the boat. "Anar noticed me," he told himself. "If I kill that spawn of Hormungand, the village whore, he'll gladly reward me." His heart pounded in his chest, but he forced himself on. "It went this way," someone shouted. A trail of slime and footprints, some filled with blood, lay ahead. They followed the gruesome trail until they came to a sudden stop. Gary pushed himself to the front of the group and saw what delayed them. A rocky promontory lay ahead. In the center of that hill yawned a cave. Blood stained its rocky mouth. Their prey had gone underground. Anar muscled his way to the front. "What are we waiting for?" he shouted. "Let's go down there and kill it." Gary swallowed a lump in his throat. "Yes, sir," he said. He stepped toward the Nicor's hole, only rudely shoved aside. Arnlog stepped into the cave. "That scaly son of a bitch took my ear," he growled. "I'm going in there to get it back." The other men shouted and clapped at his bravery. Gary scowled, but a small part of me tried to ignore. Was actually thankful someone else went in first. "Coward," he reproached himself. The Danes followed Arnlog into the cave. Darkness fell around them, split broken only by shafts of moonlight entering through holes in the ceiling. They had not gone far, and they discovered the passage ahead was flooded. "It's gone for a swim," Arnlog growled. "Should we follow it?" Gary asked. The creature had come out of the water, after all. Even blind, it could have the advantage. Arnlog glared at Gary. "You don't want to finish what you started?" He snorted. "Fine, I'll go in myself." Arnlog climbed down to the pool and vanished below the surface. A long moment passed where he came back up. "The passage opens up ahead. There's air there, and I bet the bastard's there too." He grinned. "Let's kill him." Arnlog disappeared back under the water. Several others pushed past Gary and dove after him. Gary gripped his spear, remembered Halvor had not yet been avenged, and followed. The water seeping through gaps in his leather and furs was not too cold. Gary's clothing pulled him down as he swam. He had to kick upwards periodically so his knife did not catch on the cavern floor. Moonlight glimmered in the water ahead as the tunnel opened up. The Danes ahead of him emerged in the water without trouble. If the Nicor was there, it was not attacking. Then one of the Danes fell back into the water. Blood poured from his savage throat, surrounding Gary in a crimson cloud. The red warmth caressed him through his clothes. He choked back down vomit. Ignoring his nausea, he forced himself forward. When he emerged from the water, he saw others had gained the upper hand. They hemmed in the blinded monster and hewed at it with their weapons, sometimes drawing blood, sometimes not. The Nicor lashed at them with its claws. The men easily dodged its attacks. Despite its wounds, the creature was still not without its strength. Eski was not fast enough and caught a wicked slashing blow in his thigh. He staggered, and the Nicor leaped, knocking him aside and fleeing to the shadows. "After it!" Arnlog shouted. Gary followed him into a dark passage, keeping his hands tight on his spear in case of ambush. He felt his heart in his throat, but forced himself to keep his breathing steady. A tunnel opened up another cavern where moonlight streamed in through cracks in the ceiling. "Where is the bastard?" Arnlog began, for the creature dropped shrieking on them from an overhanging ledge. Unfortunately for the monster, two of the Danes had their spears up and caught the creature on the spearheads. They tossed it forward, slamming it into the stone floor of the cavern. Gary rushed forward to join the renewed attack, but then a glint of moonlight on metal caught his eye. A row of swords lay neatly against a cavern wall near a pile of rotten bog plants. Many bore nicks or notches, just like the weapons the Danes themselves carried. Oh gods, it takes trophies just like we do. He thought back to the captured English weapons hanging above Anar's seat in the timbered hall back home. "Son of a whore!" Anar shouted. Gary turned to see his lord behind him, kneeling next to a mutilated corpse. "Who is—" Gary began before he got a good look at the face. Though the dead man's nose was crushed and his jaw hung sideways, enough of the face remained intact for Gary to recognize him. "Falky?" Anar turned away from the corpse, his expression murderous. He strode toward the struggling mass of men and monster. As his lord approached, Arnlog got lucky. The Nicor twisted away from another man's sword blow, exposing a gap between two thick scales on its belly. Screaming with anger, Arnlog ran his spear forward. The long iron spearhead buried itself in the creature's vitals. Arnlog twisted it, raising the monster's screams to new heights. The maddened Dane leaned on the spear, forcing the creature to the ground. Anar approached Sven. "Spear," he demanded. The older warrior handed Anar his weapon, then stepped aside and allowed the warlord to approach the dying monster. "This is for Falky, you horse-humping bastard." Anar rammed his spear to the Nicor's throat. Gary winced at the sound of metal spearhead scraping on the stones beneath the monster's neck. He forced himself to watch as Anar slowly worked the creature's head off with the wide spearhead. The warlord then knelt, slipped his hand in the creature's fang-lined mouth, and took up the fallen foe's head. He turned to the assembled Danes. "Back to the ship," he ordered. 6 men lost, Anar said, and the warriors gathered around the voyage's second funeral pyre. "Can we take a rich monastery with only 19? "Bah!" Arnlog shouted. He hefted the serpent axe Anar had given him. "The fat monks of the White Christ will be easy pickings." "And let's not forget the cattle and women of the villages," Eski shouted, his wounds weakening his voice. "We've got 2 ships now, more room." Anar nodded. "Perhaps. But if they raised an alarm? 19 warriors might be fine to raid a monastery or village. What happens if you encounter some real men-at-arms? It might be prudent to stop off the Orkneys first, pick up more men." The others muttered among themselves. More men would mean a greater chance of survival, but meant a smaller share of the loot. Alvar and Gary had once talked about all the rewards fighting could bring, golden arm rings and women to cook their meals and warm their beds. Gary had tried to summon up all the benefits the coming raids would bring, but visions of loot faded, soaked with the blood he had seen shed by the monster's claws. Gary inhaled, steeling himself. The Norns had spoken. It was their time to die, and they died well. The images of dead men receded, but did not vanish. Anar's voice seized attention. "We'll get more men at the first settlement we find, then to England." The Danes roared. Gary cheered too, trying desperately to think about monastic gold and English wenches, but his cries were half-hearted. The night's battle with the Nicor had been his first taste of combat, and it was bitter indeed. Anar motioned Gary forward. He apparently spotted the young man's long face. As Gary approached, Anar fished in his furs and threw a silver ring. "Arnlog is not the only man who deserves a reward, my boy. Your idea helped us kill the beast and avenge Falky." He handed Gary the ring. Thank you, sir," Gary stuttered. He slipped on the ring. The other warriors cheered. Gary smiled sheepishly, but his heart hung heavily in his chest. "I thought the Viking life would be spread better than scraping the leavings out of the bogs," he thought. "It doesn't seem so grand right now." Anar raised a hand to silence his men. "Now get back to the ship," he roared. 6 weeks and a detour to Orkneyar later, the Danes fell upon an English village. They'd looted half the town and a nearby monastery before someone managed to raise an alarm. It was time to run before the English enemy soldiers got them. Gary and the others rushed in longships carrying gold, sheep, and the occasional struggling woman. "Quickly!" Anar shouted. They vaulted over the side of the beached ships and rushed the oars. Few remained on land to help push. Slowly, too slowly, the long ship slid into the ocean. Once oars bit water, those already aboard added their strength. Those behind, both vessels slid into the river. The men scrambled aboard and joined their compatriots at the oars. By the time the English soldiers arrived, the Danes were well away. Gary watched the English brandish their weapons futilely as they rushed toward the shoreline. The Danes only lost one man during the raid, and they'd gained much. But despite the victory, Gary wasn't happy. His gaze returned to the column of smoke behind them. His thoughts returned to the screams and blood. "All right, my boy?" Anar asked. Gary nodded. "Yes, sir." Anar slapped him on the back. "First time you fought against men, eh?" The Danish warlord smiles. "This'll lift your spirit." He turned and reached for a sea chest. He pulled a silver arm ring carved to look like a coiling serpent. "You deserve another," he said. He gestured expansively to the loot behind them. Gold in many cases still slick with the blood of men they'd killed to take it. None of this would be possible without you helping kill that monster who performed just as well as against the English, too. Gary remembered the screams of surprised English as the Danes split them open on their spears, but his lord was watching. Hesitantly, Gary slipped the ring on. Back home, he'd seen men at the village wandering around with the arm rings. How proud they were to have gone a Viking. How the pretty girls marveled at them. It'd be nice to have a wife, preferably 2 or even 3, and raiding the English would go a long way to getting one. The first thing that came to his mind, however, was not glory or the possibility of wooing, but the coldness of the metal arm ring. It was cold like the flesh of the men who died fighting the Nicor, cold like the bodies they'd heaped on the pyre. He forced the thoughts away. It was dishonorable to be ungrateful to one's lord. "Thank you, sir." Anar laughed. "You've earned it, my boy." A squabble broke out in the other end of the ship. Gary craned his neck to look over Anar's shoulder. 2 other men fought over a girl roughly Gary's age. She was comely, and would even more so once her bruises faded. But she whimpered. Her sounds of pain reminded him of Eske, whose wounds had festered. He'd slowly died in the days after the battle with the Nicor before they got to Orkneyar. Anar walked away to restore order, leaving Gary alone. He looked once more back over the water toward the smoke rising from the ravaged English village. "We are Nicors." The end.
All right.